Hi, I'm Renee Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today.
Yeah, Renee, really excited about today's show. We've got some awesome guests on.
Really do.
Yeah, some of these topics are really cool. And we're going to have Amanda Gumbert's on, Megan Bulin, Jacob Muller, and then we got Ellen Crocker doing a little cameo drop-in on a Tree Week promo. So some really good stuff. But I think we're going to start today with Megan. She's going to be talking about what's a mushroom, right? And then what is a mushroom?
What actually is that thing, you know?
Yeah, and then we've got Dr. Jacob Muller, and unfortunately, Kentucky's had some really bad disasters over the last few years, and he's going to talk a little bit about, when disaster strikes and what that really means for the kind of the woodland community. And we have Dr. Amanda Gumbert on here, and she's going to be talking about a really cool new kind of project she's been involved with, water in Kentucky. We'll let her tell a little bit more about that, and then we'll get to that promo about Tree Week, because next week is Tree Week, right?
Exactly.
So, and I know that we've got a lot of stuff planned for next week and throughout the week, and I know that our Urban Forest Initiative does as well. So you'll hear a little bit about that, but make sure you're available all next week, because there's programming every day next week and over the weekends as well. So glad to have everybody with us. If you got any questions via Zoom, just put them into the chat pod, and if you're on Facebook Live, you can use the comment section. We'll respond accordingly. But Renee, just delighted to be with you today.
Yeah, thank you. So let's go ahead and get started, because we've got a packed show. So Megan, if you can get on and tell us exactly what
is this mushroom you speak of? Yes.
Yeah, what is this?
All right, so today we're going to be talking a little bit about, what is a mushroom, what is a fungus. This is going to be a really quick overview, and unfortunately we won't be able to cover even a small fraction of what mushrooms really are and what they're doing in the world around us. There is going to be a longer presentation on this topic during Tree Week, so if you'd like to learn more than what we're going to talk about today, please feel free to sign up. I'll be talking in depth about mushrooms and a little bit about mycology in the ecological sense next week during Tree Week. But let's go ahead and we'll learn a little bit about mushrooms today. Just 1 second. Okay, so today we're going to be talking a little bit about what is a mushroom, what is a fungus, and what are they kind of doing in the world around us. So the first thing to kind of put out there is, what are mushrooms? And for a long time, taxonomists and biologists, they thought that mushrooms were a type of plant. And it makes sense, they don't move, they're rooted in the ground, much like plants. They don't seem to have to predate upon anything for their food. They seem to people's eyes at the time, make their own. And so for a long time, it was thought that mushrooms were a type of plant. And in old botanical textbooks, you will sometimes see mushrooms grouped in with plants in ID. But now we know that that's actually not the case, and that mushrooms are part of the kingdom fungi, which are their own thing. They are completely taxonomically separate from plants as well as animals. They're their own kingdom, which is the largest classification of these organisms. And they are very distinct from all other organisms. They do their own thing. And within this kingdom of fungi, there's a lot of different types of fungi, and the basidiomycetes, the little group here at the top with the red mushroom, those are the ones that we think of as mushrooms and fungi, but there's so much more diversity to this kingdom than just the ones that we see popping up in our yards. A large majority of this kingdom is actually microbial and microscopic in nature, and we don't even see them, but they're around us all the time. But today we'll be talking a little bit just about the basics of what these things are and how you ID them. Fun fact is that mushrooms are actually more closely related to the kingdom Animalia, to animals like us, than they are to plants. So you actually have more in common with the mushrooms on your pizza than you do with the spinach or the tomatoes. Although you really don't have much in common with either one, but from a broad standpoint, you and the mushroom are more closely related. All right, so what are they doing out in the natural world? Well, for the most part, fungi are amazing because they are nature's cleaning crew. They are the garbage men of the natural world. They're going around, they're breaking down organic matter, decomposing plants and animals that have died. If it weren't for fungi and other microbes, we would be surrounded by giant piles of just detritus all the time. Fungi and microbes are out there. They're breaking all of these things down, decomposing that material and creating energy to be released back into the system and into the world around us. This is just a small part of what fungi do. There's a lot of other roles that they can play, but this is probably one of the most significant from an ecological sense, is this role as decomposers, as saprophytes in the system. So we're going to talk just a little bit, very briefly, about the very basics of mushroom ID. You know, you're out for a walk in the woods and you see this cool mushroom. You're like, oh, I want to know what this is. How do you go about doing that? What are some key characteristics you can look for? Well, one of the things I would suggest is take really good pictures. You're going to see a lot of pictures in this presentation, and the vast majority are my own. They're pictures that I've taken of fungi out in the woods, and taking lots of photos of the fungi that you see and all the different characteristics so that you can reference those photos later on if you want to try to identify them can be really helpful in trying to get accurate IDs on these mushrooms. So we're going to start at the base, start at the very bottom, and work our way up. And that is the mycelium. Mycelium is the actual body of the fungus. You know, think of the mushroom that you see as being like the apple on a tree. The mushroom is just the fruit. The mycelium is the actual tree. It's the body of that organism. It's the living biotic unit. And the mycelium gathers water and nutrients for the fungus and helps to extend this fungal network of mycelium, which the fungus uses to continue to grow and thrive. And then that mushroom is just the fruit. It's the apple, the structure that helps spread the mushroom's reproductive material and make more mushrooms someplace else. The largest organism on Earth is thought to possibly be a fungus, and that is because of this mycelial network. It's called the humongous fungus, and it is a giant armillaria mushroom, which is a species of pathogenic mushroom that is growing on Douglas fir trees in the Malheur National Forest out in Oregon. It's thought that this hyphal network, this mycelial network, could cover over 2,000 acres and might be between 2,400 and 8,600 years old. They've been able to make this approximation based upon the genetics of mycelium collected from different areas across this range, being able to see that it is all genetically the same organism, and therefore it's probably all the same mycelial network from this one singular fungus. So pretty cool. The biggest organism out there might be a fungus. So there is that mycelium, that's the base, it's the actual body of the organism and how nutrients are acquired. And from there, we're going to go up to some more characters you can use for like solid ID. And first is this bulb character. A lot of fungi will have this egg, they call it. It's not an actual egg like in a chicken or a bird, but it's a structure that the fruit might come out of. And that base or bulb can be very diagnostic. There are several genera of mushrooms, such as the Amanita genus, which is very well known, that characteristically have this base or bulb. And it is really important to verify whether or not a mushroom that you're trying to ID might have that base or bulb characteristic, because like this mushroom, a mushroom with this characteristic might be very toxic. Several members of the Amanita genus are famously toxic, lethally so, like the destroying angel that you can see in this picture here. This is a very, very toxic mushroom. It does grow here in Kentucky, and it's about the time of year when you might see it fruiting. So being able to look for that base or bulb characteristic is very important in identifying fungi and verifying your ID. You might have to clear away some detritus and look at the base there to see if it's present, but knowing whether or not that's there is really important. Now, not all mushrooms that have this bulb are going to be toxic, but some of the most toxic mushrooms that we have in North America will have this characteristic. So it's a good one to look for. And then you have this universal veil. This can take the form of different speckling or texture on the cap of the mushroom, or possibly this little annulus or ring around the stem of the mushroom. We'll talk more about that in a minute. These are characteristics you always want to try to look for in mushroom ID. Not all mushrooms are going to have these characteristics, but when they do, it's an important feature to use in diagnostics. And it's important to look at mushrooms in different stages of growth when trying to make this diagnosis, because these are features that are very sometimes ephemeral. They can easily be consumed by insects or worn away by rain or weather events. So looking for mushrooms in different stages of development that are the same species might be able to help you verify whether or not that characteristic is present. Then you have the stem. Now you might not think that a stem is really diagnostic, but it can be. There can be different colors and textures of stems. They might snap easily like chalk, or they might peel like string cheese. And then you can have reticulation, this very distinctive patterning on a lot of stems, especially in bolete mushrooms. So looking at the color, the texture, the patterning of that stem, that's an important diagnostic feature. The ring is this annulus that we were just talking about. It's a remnant of that universal veil when the fungus grows up out of that egg that some of them have. And there are some genera that will often have this characteristic, and it's really important to look for the presence of that. Now, it might not be a really substantial ring like on this armillaria mushroom here. It could be something very small and delicate that might be easily worn away. So again, looking for mushrooms in different stages of development is an important thing to keep in mind when you're trying to identify a specific fungus. Gills, pores, or spines. What does it have? Now, most of the mushrooms that we have around here will have one of these three. And this is where the spores of the mushroom, which we'll talk about in just a second, are going to be held. You have toothed fungi like lion's mane or this little jelly tooth. They're not actual teeth, of course, but we call them teeth. They're these little protrusions on the underside of the cap. And each one of those protrusions is going to be covered in spores that the mushroom will eventually have blown away or washed away to go hopefully make more mushrooms and more fungi someplace else. Fungi with pores, it's the same idea, but a little bit of a different mechanism. You have all these little pores, these little dots on the underside of the cap, and up inside each one of those pores, tons of spores stuffed up in there. And when the environmental conditions are right, they'll be released and swept away on the breeze. A lot of polypore fungi are called polypores because they have this pored characteristic rather than gills or teeth on the underside of the cap. Chicken of the woods, hen of the woods, pheasant's backs, these are all mushrooms that are going to have these pores on their undersurface, as well as most of the bolete fungi. And understanding what kind of spore-bearing structure mushrooms have is a really important basic component of ID. There was a group of people pretty recently who suffered some severe gastrointestinal poisoning because they mistook some chicken of the woods fungi, or they mistook some jack-o'-lantern fungi, which are toxic and can cause gastrointestinal problems, for chicken of the woods, which is an edible, safe mushroom. And these mushrooms are both orange, but that's completely where the similarity ends. The jack-o'-lantern fungi have gills, while the chicken of the woods has these pores. So looking at these really basic features of ID is absolutely critical. You have to know what you're looking for and what the characteristics of a specific mushroom are if you want to ID it correctly. You can't go off just one feature. And then you have your gilled fungi. And this is what most people think of when they think of mushrooms, very distinctive gills on the undersurface of the cap. And those gills can vary in size, in width, in their texture, but up between each of those gills, there are thousands of spores that are going to be released out into the environment for reproduction in that mushroom. And speaking of spores, they are not a characteristic that you can really use super concretely for ID. You'll hear a lot of people talk about looking at the spores of a mushroom for ID, and it can be an important component of accurate mushroom ID. But from a visual perspective, you can't use spore color or shape alone to accurately identify mushrooms in the field. Spore prints can go along with other features for an accurate ID, but on their own, they are not adequate. Now, in a lab or diagnostic-based setting, people often use spores for ID, but that's a little bit different than recreational ID, which is what we're talking about today. Well, it looks like my last slide isn't on here, so I apologize. There was going to be one final little slide talking about the cap texture of the mushroom. I'm not sure where it went to, but I am happy to take any questions that you all might have about mushrooms or mushrooms at Mushroom ID. And if you'd like to learn more, please sign up for the webinar next week.
mushrooms to me are just fascinating. It's like, where did you, because you see them pop them up in your yard, you see them on wood, you see them on trees. I mean, it just seems like they pop up everywhere and they can grow in an abundance of different places.
Absolutely. Mushrooms occur in all kinds of different ecosystems, and you find a lot of them growing in your yard or on your trees. And, usually people have this kind of gut reaction to mushrooms that this must be something dangerous. And, very often the vast majority of fungi are not going to be dangerous to you at all, especially if you don't eat them. There's a concern for kids and pets, and that might be a concern as well. But I think it's pretty easy, to communicate to children this isn't something you consume. And very, very rarely, I will say, do pets mess with mushrooms. I've received a few different emails this year, people concerned that their dog was going to eat a mushroom in their yard. Very rarely are pets going to mess with fungi, especially happy, healthy, well cared for domesticated animals. Now, a lot of wildlife love to feed on mushrooms, but that's a part of their biology and the way that they've evolved over time. But mushrooms are doing all kinds of cool things in the world around us every single day.
Megan, I loved your presentation. Great pictures, really good stuff there. And it made me think about mycorrhizae and, how important they are in tree growth. And it's just, mushrooms are just fascinating and do so much. It's really cool. I love your work and what you're working on too. So that's cool.
Yeah, mycorrhizae are one of my favorite, that.
Yeah,
there's all kinds of cool stuff going on. I wish we had more time to talk about it.
Well, I'd like to get you to talk more about that in the future, because so many people don't realize just how important they are to really trees and their health and growth and all of that. So it's cool.
Sounds
Talk
like
about mycorrhizae forever.
Yeah, there you go. I like it. Yeah, we can mushroom out. There we go.
There you go.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Megan. We greatly appreciate you being on.
Thank you.
As always, yes, great stuff. Yeah,
Billy, disasters one after the other this year. We've had tornadoes in December, we've had flooding recently, and it just seems like it just keeps coming.
I know, and it's so dry right now. I'm so fearful we're going to have a bad fire season. So thankfully.
Thankfully, Dr. Muller, you're here to tell us disasters.
So what do we do when these disasters strike?
Yeah, that's what I can say. I can't control the weather, the climate, and all these disturbances, perturbations to our woodlands. But I think today we'll kind of talk about what sort of things we can do to respond to these major events that happen in our forest. And they're unavoidable, right? They're going to happen, and that's part of what we accept when we own land and manage land. And so
yeah, thank you, Jacob, for putting this together. Appreciate it.
Looks good.
Okay. All right. So again, I'm Jacob Muller. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Forestry, and I really focus on hardwood silviculture and disturbances, storm damage, degraded woodlands, and really thinking about the future of our forests, how we manage, how we might try to make our forests more resilient down decades down the road. So we know that, as I mentioned, our forests are always responding to disturbances, right? And when there's disturbance, oftentimes we're going to have damage to our woodland. Sometimes that damage can be extreme enough to kill the tree. But we define disturbances as events that cause change in the structure of the forest, the species composition, and all of these things beyond just the natural growth and death of an individual tree. So anything that affects a tree from the day that it grows from a seed into a seedling into a mature tree, something that affects that process. And damage to our timber is something that's caused by a disturbance, and that typically decreases or even eliminates its productivity, right? When we say eliminates its productivity, it's kind of a nice way of saying that the tree has died, either main stem breakage or has been uprooted and fallen over. And we've seen these things happen in our woodlands. And it seems like we've seen or experienced these things a lot more recently. But disturbances have been interacting with forests for as long as there's been forests. But the rate, the intensity of those disturbances can change over time. And I think we're beginning to see some of those effects. But disturbances and our forests really interact in two primary ways, through those biotic factors and abiotic factors. And we're acutely aware of both of these factors. Right? We have Dr. Crocker, who she describes both of these, but with a particular focus on these biotic factors, right? Insects, diseases, these things that attack our woodlands or disrupt how they function in the ecosystem. Today, I'm going to be mostly talking about these abiotic factors, right? These things that damage our woodlands, they limit its productivity, can disrupt its natural function. And these are things that we've experienced just in the last 10 months or so that have been very, very visible to all of us here in Kentucky. So again, those biotic disturbances is damage done by another organism. And I'm not going to spend much time on that. But our biotic disturbances, so this is done by something non-living, right? Billy just mentioned these droughty conditions that are happening right now. We're experiencing more droughts in what we call these flashy droughts, or a flash drought that can come on really quickly, dry things out really quickly. And one of the effects of that is wildfire. Right? So when droughts happen, there's often these other perturbations that occur in response. On the other end of the spectrum, when we're getting too much rain, too much water, and these very acute episodic precipitation events, we can experience flooding, especially when our forests and the forest soils are completely saturated. There's nowhere for that water to go, and it can abruptly and quickly run off into our drainage systems, into watersheds. And this, on the other end of the spectrum, is obviously a flash flood. And so these things can have really dramatic impacts in our forests. And I've also mentioned a few other things: freezes, extreme changes in temperature, and obviously tornadoes. But I want to emphasize that our forests are dynamic systems, right? So they're always changing. They always have changed, and they have a certain capacity to adapt to those changing conditions, right? Forests have adapted with disturbances. So we have trees on the landscape that are adapted to a certain level of fire so that they can live and survive and accommodate a certain level of fire and still function in the forest, in the woodland. When these disturbances change, and they change quickly, oftentimes becoming more extreme or more frequent, that can push trees to their limits and basically disable the function of the woodland, those abilities to adapt that trees have developed with might be overcome by rapid change. And that's something that we're keeping our eye on, we're monitoring, we're learning, we're studying, and trying to help foresters, forest managers prepare for rapid and dramatic changes so that forests can remain resilient. Okay. So some things that affect the form, the function, really how this forest operates, right? Our management choices, and these are things that we talk about on this show here in the Department of Forestry all the time. Things, the way that we manage, and hopefully we're making good management choices. We're not always, but that's the goal. The change in the land or land use change has dramatic effects, right? That's kind of obvious. And then these last two are really kind of the focus of this. So the disturbances and future projected climates and how those two things interact. And they're not easy to quantify, right? We're still learning, but we can measure these direct responses following disturbances and monitor that to see how the forest responds. And those are things that we are doing. So I don't think I could talk about disasters without mentioning the Eastern Kentucky flooding that occurred in late July and early August of this year. And it was a historic amount of water, of rain that fell in Eastern Kentucky. And you can really see it in that gray area, greater than 10 inches of rain. So these are historic rains. Hydrologists call these 1 in 1,000-year events. And these things are happening and they're basically exceeding the capacity of our watersheds to contain the amount and intensity of water. Right? So these can have really dramatic effects, right? We don't often associate moderate to low levels of flooding with forest disturbance, but they can have pretty dramatic impacts in the forest and how they function when you have water that's coming through and remaining in these areas that are, for the most part or most of the year, dry. That can affect how a tree grows. And then you have the more dramatic effects of complete landslides or washing out forests, destabilizing their roots and uprooting the trees. Right. So flooding can affect the tree growth and the tree's survival, really, its ability to persist on the landscape. The flood damage really depends. So how much a tree or what level of injury that tree sustains really does depend on when and how that flooding happens. So time of the year is really important. If flooding were to occur during the dormant season, oftentimes trees are able to withstand a lot of that damage unless it's a complete erosion event or a rapid erosion event, as opposed to the growing season when flooding can have a much more impactful to the function of a particular tree. Trees might need some special care following flooding, and we have to ask ourselves, what are we managing, right? So are we managing individual trees or are we managing an entire woodland, right? And those things are going to impact the decisions that we make, right? If we're just a landowner that has a few trees, you can likely manage those much more intensively than you can a large 40 or 50 acre woodland or larger that you're managing. So those are important considerations to make. Erosion and changes in the soil characteristics are probably one of the most impactful effects of flooding, right? So when we have a lot of water that is eroding hillsides, that can destabilize trees, cause a lot of uprooting, and limit the amount of nutrients that a tree can take in to grow and survive. So there's a few different types of flood damage that we see in trees or associated with trees. So again, changes to the soil, physical damage, and that one is perhaps more obvious, when trees either fall over or wiped down the river or washed down the river, excuse me, or something that's happening that is killing or severely damaging that tree. A few other things that we don't often think about, but could be an important thing to think about are effects after the flooding, right? So insect and disease damage can happen in flooded areas where these trees and these forests or woodlands become weakened, right? So the flooding might stress trees and they don't necessarily, they're not operating at 100%. Right, so they might be allocating their resources to other areas of the tree to survive. And what we see oftentimes in these damaged woodlands might be an earlier fall for those trees. We might see leaves coming off sooner than they otherwise would, changing colors and kind of going dormant to kind of preserve their resources, get them through the winter and start back up the next year, hopefully under better circumstances. So a number of different things that we see. Additionally, beyond just the disturbances to a tree, are disturbances to forest roads, right, and culverts, things that divert water away, that might destabilize roads. If we're trying to go in and manage a forest, this could create some major barriers to our access and safety in the woodlands, right? And disrupt other natural functions, house streams, other aquatic species, right? On the other end, last winter, we had 2 major tornadoes, right? These had really dramatic effects in their own right. You can see in this photo, all these, it just kind of looks like a bunch of matchsticks, right? You can see little root balls uprooted from these very dramatic and intense winds associated with this tornado, right? These are disasters that happen in Kentucky and that woodland owners experience, right? And it can happen on a larger scale than we've often imagined before, affecting thousands of acres through a single event. The event that happened in December impacted over 7,000 or 8,000 acres of woodlands, and so by no means a small impact. Ice storms are another major impact that we experience here in Kentucky that damage our woodlands and cause disruption to the function of our forests. And so collectively, there are a number of different disasters, so disturbances that can happen to our woodlands. And some of the time it might feel like it's just outside of our control. And oftentimes it is. Right? We can do so much management in the forest to improve forest health. We can try to make our forests more resilient to wildfire. Maybe that means thinning or clearing out some of the woody debris on the ground and other areas that could carry a fire. Those things are tangible things, but some of these major disturbances can leave us feeling rather helpless as a woodland owner. And it's important to know that there are resources out there for woodland owners. Right? We have a series of publications describing how to manage or how to select trees to manage, what trees might be worth saving in the landscape, what trees should be removed in the process involved with that. So regardless of the disturbance, a few things to consider, right? Safety is always number one, right? Whether it's flooding, ice storms, tornadoes, you always need to be aware anytime you step into a disturbed area, right? Things to consider whether to cut or leave a tree, what opportunities there are for you, tax deductions through the IRS, and NRCS programs that might help you start to manage your woodland or respond to those disturbances, and managing for those wildfire risks or insects and disease risks following any flooding disturbance, right? So I'm just going to quickly breeze through this. These are important things that we need to think about, right? Always wear personal protective equipment. Never go into the woods when it's really windy, especially if there are branches, other trees that are caught hanging up high in the canopy. Those can be extremely dangerous. It's always a good idea to flag those dangerous trees or those dangerous conditions, and get those trees out of the woods, and especially off the roads and the trails. Okay. Don't cut bent or pinned trees. This can create a lot of tension when they're bent, and when you release that tension, it can create a response that could trigger a really basically a slingshot that could sling a branch or a tree into you or someone else, right? Always looking overhead, and never fell lodged trees similar to the pen trees, right? So all sorts of disturbances, and we've got guides to help us. I think I'm running out of time here, but it depends on which trees, how we decide to manage those. If there's just a certain level of damage, or if they're completely, or maybe not completely, but they're reached a point where they're not going to necessarily recover and be healthy parts of the forest ecosystem. So trees experience all of these things: main stem break, major branch breakage, bending trees, greater than 50% crown loss or less than 50% crown loss, and obviously downed trees, right? Times that it's important to probably remove those trees are when we have main stem breakage or even major branch breakage that might introduce pathogens or disease into that tree. It's not going to be able to recover. And depending on your management objectives, if you're okay with having some trees remain in your forest, perhaps even for wildlife, those are all things that you'll want to think about and work with a forester to help you decide how to manage that, right? So again, severe crown loss versus low to moderate crown loss, where when we have low to moderate crown loss, it might not necessarily be a scenario where we need to remove that tree. It might be able to recover and become a functioning part of that forest. All right, so I'm just going to end on with a couple of options that you can do when disaster strikes, right? And number one is assess the damage, right? So you can look at resources that help you recoup some of that money through disaster relief and timber revenue loss, and recoup some of that, right? Unfortunately, so many folks who own woodlands may never recoup the full value of what's lost, depending on what sort of insurance covers that damage or that timber loss. But I always recommend to, first thing, get in touch with a forester and be patient, right? When these major events happen, foresters are likely going to be very busy, right? There's all sorts of landowners with unique situations that are reaching out to foresters, especially state KDF foresters. And while they're trying to get out and help everyone, sometimes it does take time. We also have a great group of professionals in this state that are the consulting foresters that you can reach out to perhaps get a forester out more quickly to your land, but that also depends on kind of the level of disturbance. And I can't reiterate this enough, that there is help with damage to your woodland through NRCS, and foresters can really help connect you with those resources. We've also got some resources at kytimberdamage.ca.uky.edu, and feel free to reach out, and hopefully we can help connect you with resources that you need to respond to these disturbances. So I think with that, I'm going to stop.
Thank you for that presentation. I'm sure that's great information for anybody that has been through all of these devastations that we've had within the last, I guess, 6-8 months. So we greatly appreciate you joining us.
Oh yeah, Jacob. Yes, I can't thank you enough, right? I mean, and hopefully people can remember this presentation when the next disaster strikes, because it's going to happen.
It's gonna
Right?
happen.
It's going to happen. We know it's going to happen. So being prepared, understanding how and to address that is critical. So Jacob, I really appreciate you assembling that information, keeping that timber damage website up and current is really important, and it gives people a repository of information and what's going on with the latest crises. So if there are some issues, you can rest assured that we'll have that updated as appropriate down the line. So Jacob, appreciate you paying attention to this stuff and helping the woodland owners and our county agents kind of understand what we can do in our woods when disaster strikes.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, thanks for having me, Billy and Renee.
Yep. Good stuff. Yep. Thank you.
Moving on to Tree Week. Next week is and
Tree week. Yeah, it's really
the trees, right?
Hey, I've told you, trees are the answer, right?
You have told me that several times. And we've got a little promo. Dr. Crocker couldn't be with us today, but she's got a little promo out there for us just to kind of tell us and give us a little information about Tree Week and what we might be able to see next week.
Yeah, and she's got a special guest with her, Miss Heather Wilson, who is a product of our department, but also with the city of Lexington here, and she manages the Reforest of Bluegrass and some of those efforts, and works with Dr. Crocker quite a bit. So without further ado, let's check out this promo.
Hi everyone, Tree Week is coming up next week, and have you heard of Tree Week before?
I have you?
Yeah, Tree Week is a celebration for all things tree. And if you're watching from the woods today, you probably already love trees and are fully aware of the many different benefits that they provide us, whether it's environmental, economic benefits, or just benefits to our well-being having trees around. But Tree Week is a week that started 5 years ago to really recognize and celebrate trees. It started in Lexington, Kentucky, but since then it's moved out, and this week you can find Tree Week events across the state and communities across Kentucky. These could be in-person events like a Tree Week tree planting. They could be virtual events like webinars. You might even get a free tree this week. You can find out more on the Tree Week website, and also join us next week on From the Woods Today. We're going to talk more about Tree Week. We're going to talk about what Heather and the city of Lexington is doing, some great resources that they have on their website for you as well.
That's right. Yes, please come out and join us. There's something for everyone, from young to old, and it's a really great way to just connect with the trees that are in our community, learn about what they do for us if you don't already know, maybe just, broaden that imagination of what trees do for us in our world.
And even before that episode, though, that's going to happen next week, we have Tree Week events happening. So make sure you check out the website. And if you're in the area, attend our signature Tree Week planting that's happening to kick off Tree Week.
That's exactly right. And that will be happening at Kirk Levington Park on Friday, October the 7th. It starts from 5:30. We will have a band joining us. And I heard that the mayor is coming out as well. So come help us celebrate Tree Week, kick it off, plant our signature tree for this year, and also a tree to commemorate one of our council members who's leaving us this year, and who's always been a great tree advocate for us, for the city.
Sounds like fun to me. But if you don't live near Lexington, check the Tree Week website, and there'll be events in your area too, maybe. So hope to see you next week.
That's right. Hope to see you next week.
So that's just a little preview of kind of, next week we're going to be talking about cities and trees and how they are important. So just during From the Woods Today, but then there's like a slew of other events that you can find out about that.
There really are. I think there's some events starting as soon as the 8th and continuing on through the 16th. So check them out. That the Tree Week has grown so much over the last few years, and to see it spread out across the state is really exciting. Trees are important everywhere, not just right here on campus or in Lexington. We need them everywhere. So let's get out and celebrate trees and all that they do for us. It's a great reminder of the importance of trees and how we need to care for them.
Mhm. And speaking of trees, water is something that really helps trees,
Hand in
something
hand,
that we
right?
need right now. So we have Dr. Amanda Gumbert on to talk about a Water in Kentucky book profile that she's going to tell us about.
Yeah, hi. So it's really hard. It's hard to decide if it's trees for water or water for trees. So, but we know that they're both essential for one another. And so I just want to share with you just a short little presentation. Let me get this going here. Hopefully you can see that okay. And if I can get all of my, let's go here. Sorry for the delay there. So
Looks good.
yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to share with you Water in Kentucky, which is also a reminder as we approach this month and move through our activities. So excited about Tree Week activities and how important trees are for clean water. And following up Tree Week, we have the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Clean Water Act. And several episodes ago, I gave you a little more information about the Clean Water Act and the history of that and why it's important for our clean water here in the United States, and especially in Kentucky. But the real thing I wanted to drive home is how the effectiveness of the Clean Water Act, as well as any of the policies that we have, those effectiveness of those policies are really increased with citizen awareness and engagement. And so I wanted to share with you this Water in Kentucky book. Some of you may be familiar with it. It has been out for a few years, but with the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act, we're bringing this back to the public's attention and just reminding folks that this is a great book that exists here that showcases the vast resources that we have in water here in Kentucky. The book is a collection of 23 essays, and the authors include researchers, water professionals, environmentalists. Like, it's kind of a span of the folks who are authors in this book. It's edited by Brian Lee, Dan Carey, and Alice Jones. And all three of them, if you know any of them or all three of them, they have also a wide perspective on water resources. And so it's just a really great collection of information about water. So it varies from groundwater topics like karst and springs and how springs influence the settling of Kentucky. It covers the significance of our river basins like the Green River and the basins in the western part of the state, as well as the cultural importance of rivers in Appalachia, and also includes urban water management. So we often, and especially on this show, we talk about trees and water and maybe think more of our rural landscapes, but certainly water in urban landscapes. There's just lots of factors that influence the quality of water there. So it's 256 pages. There's lots of images, there are maps. It's a little bit size-wise, a bit like a textbook, but once you start reading it, you'll see that it's truly a collection of essays. So not too much technical information without the balance of the human dimension. So it's available through the University Press of Kentucky, and also you can find it on Amazon. You can find it at other independent bookstores of your choice, but wanted to let folks know that there is an opportunity for the rest of October to get a discount from the University Press on this book using the code FRESHWATER. So 30% off your purchase of Water in Kentucky. When you purchase it from the University Press, it's now a soft cover book. So the first printing was hardcover only, and now it's softcover. So, but just know that this is available. So in case you're looking for a holiday gift for that hard to buy for naturalist type, this might be a great addition to your list. And so just I'll keep this short and sweet, but just remind folks that we have so many resources, water resources in Kentucky, and they are vital for the health of our ecosystems in total, and they all work together. But get out there, enjoy Kentucky's water resources, take care of them, do your part to take care of them. And just remember that as we go through the rest of the month of October, we're celebrating that 50th anniversary of the signing of the Clean Water Act, and how important that has been to ensure that we all have safe and healthy water resources across the state.
Well, thanks, Amanda. We greatly appreciate
Yeah.
that presentation. You know,
Hey,
while-
I'm sorry, Renee. I got so excited. You gave like a little bonus for our viewers, freshwater, right? So they could get a 30% off of that awesome resource.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
So.
so a little exclusive on From the Woods Today.
I know, right? Yeah.
Start doing that more often, you know.
No, Dr. Gumbert, thank you. Really, I know you have dedicated your life to protecting and helping maintain our waters here in Kentucky, and they are so obviously important. And yeah, I really appreciate all you do, and it's kind of highlighting the importance of water and helping folks, navigate the issues around water and making sure that we've got abundant and clean water. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for letting me be a perennial guest here.
Yes.
So I appreciate that.
So,
Yay water and yay trees.
yes, they go hand in hand for sure. So good stuff.
Well, you know, Billy, today it's like the only thing we didn't talk about was wildlife. We talked about trees and water and storm damage and mushrooms, and so we had a broad range of topics that we went over.
We did. Big thanks to each of our guests. I appreciate Megan and Amanda and Jacob for sharing some of their knowledge and expertise, and appreciate you all being with us each week. The show is for you, and it's meant to try to promote and encourage the good stewardship of our resources, including water and woods and wildlife. So if it falls in that realm, we want to try to help people get the most out of it, but also make sure that we're taking care of it for the long haul.
You know, and speaking of that, if anybody has any suggestions for shows, we've been known to run a time or two. So if you go to fromthewoodstoday.com, there's a survey on there. You can tell us a little bit about yourself, anything that you see. You can submit a photo if there's something like, ooh, what's this in my woods? I've never seen this before. We can try to identify that and let you know. And you never know, it might be on a From the Woods Today topic.
Yeah, no doubt. From a crazy little plant to some critter or a mushroom or something happening in the water, let us know and we'll try to help you out with it.
And, you know, if there's, some of these things that we've talked about today have been kind of in depth. So it's like, oh, what did Dr. Moeller talk about? I need to remember what he said about that tree. You can always go to fromthewoodstoday.com and find out that information. You know, I had a pear tree in my backyard split last weekend. So, some of those chainsaw safety things, I'm kind of going, oh, I need to pay attention.
Yeah. Go look them up there. Yeah.
Exactly. So like I said, you can always go to fromthewoodstoday.com and find every show we've ever done, which is over 100 now. We just appreciate you joining us each week.
Yeah, no doubt. Thanks for being here, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
From the woods today.